Hello everybody and welcome to my video on the Nikon Coolpix S210 right there on the top. So while I go over some of the camera's basic stats, I'll show you some photos I took with this camera. The Nikon Coolpix S210 is an 8.1 megapixel digital point and shoot with a 3x zoom. In 35mm terms, the zoom lens equates to 38mm to 114, so basically equivalent to the type of zoom that you would get on an entry-level SLR with a kit zoom. A lot of the Canons and Nikons digital SLR entry-level cameras came with things that were equivalent to about a 35 to 85, and back in the film days, that's what would have come with an entry-level SLR as well. This comes with a 1 by 2.5 inch CCD sensor. The ISO range is 64 to 2000. The electronic shutter, the shutter on this is electronically controlled. It has shutter speeds of unknown. Literally no place that I looked, not the manual, not anywhere online, had any indication of what the shutter speeds on this camera are. And the flash sync speed is also unknown, but that's because it's only automatically controlled. The flash can't be controlled by you, and you can't connect a flash to it to fire something that is off camera. The Coolpix S210's target market was the entry-level user. Now, we know this because digital point-and-shoot cameras are always entry-level. This was designed very much for size, compactness, and carryability, and if you notice, this camera is not big at all. It's, I think, very possibly the smallest camera that I've reviewed in this series. It has fairly slow performance and responsiveness, and that was even true by the standards of the time that it was released. In many of the reviews that I read from when this camera was released indicated that it was painfully slow to use, or other similar adverbs. It has comparatively poor photo quality with high JPEG compression, and that is again also true for the standard of the time. Now, this can still be used well, and you can still get good images from it, but there are limitations on it that are significant, especially by the standards of today, which is mid-2022 and going forward. This was made by Nikon in Indonesia. It was announced on the 29th of January 2008 and discontinued sometime in 2009. It was preceded by the S200, concurrent with an absolutely huge list of Nikon digital cameras when we expanded out to things like the Coolpix line, and followed by the S220. Now, if you have your Nikon Coolpix S210, we're going to go through what all of the things on this are, and then after that, we're going to go through how to use this camera. So we're going to start right here on the top, because that's where we always start. And right here, you can see there are two buttons. Well, Coolpix S210 is the model. Here there are two buttons, on-off and shutter. So if we hold the on-off button down, it will turn on. If we hold it down again, it will turn off. On the front, we have the make and the family, the flash, the lens, which is a Nikkor 3x optical zoom. There we go. There's all the lens information down there. f6.3 to 18.9 millimeters, which, as we stated earlier, is a 35mm equivalent of 38 to 114, and an aperture range of 3.1 to 5.9, meaning that wide open at 6.3 millimeters, it's an f3.1 lens, and wide open at 18.9 millimeters, it's an f5.9 lens. And then, of course, over here on the side, we have a little loop where you can put a small wrist strap if you would like. On the camera's back, of course, we have Nikon. The main LCD screen. This up here is the W and the T, that's wide. In telephoto, that's the rocker button that you use to zoom out or zoom in when you're going to take a photo. Or in playback mode, the blue indicators there align with the blue playback button to indicate that this has a function in playback mode, which is to zoom out as though you were scrolling out on a folder, or to zoom in to a single image, or actually I think you can also zoom in to see details on an image. Mode button, playback button, flash button, self-timer, OK, exposure compensation, close-up mode, menu button, delete button. Collectively, this large circle is called the four-way pad or cross pad. On the camera's bottom, we have the tripod socket, the audio-visual out port, which does that, yeah, I can get it open, which is just a little micro USB port, I think. Yeah, it's got the USB symbol, so it's got to be it's a little micro USB port. Does not look like a standard micro USB, however. I don't have one of those cables nearby to test it with either. At any rate, in all probability, you're not really going to be connecting this camera to an AV out anyway, because that would really just be for playing slideshows off of the camera. And while it can do that, the bigger question is, would a modern-ish, even television or computer screen be able to recognize this camera? And I don't know the answer to that. Here's the battery chamber, and on top of the battery chamber we have a bunch of registration info, including the serial number. Now, while we have the camera like this is probably how you'll actually be holding it to look at it. The first thing I'm going to show you how to do is change the battery, because this is an entirely electronic camera. You can't do anything with it unless you have a fresh battery. So to open the battery chamber, you simply push up the door, and the battery will pop out. And you can see also, by the way, the memory card, which is an SD card, is right back here. And you can see that. We'll take a look at that in just a second. So the battery that this takes is the Nikon lithium-ion battery pack ENEL10, which is a 3.7 volt battery. And to put it in, we've just got to figure out how it goes in. So if we try putting it in so that the Nikon faces the Nikon, that's not going to work. That is not the correct way. Looking at the front of the camera, you put it in by reading the small text and seeing the symbols for the positive and negative terminals, and then you can just slide it in like that. Does not click into place until you shut the door, at least on my camera, but I think that's the way it's actually supposed to work. It makes it very easy to take out the battery, makes it very easy to drop them if you are not holding this upside down when you change batteries. Okay, I'm going to leave that out of there for a second just so that it's not in the way. Next thing I'm going to show you how to do now that we have, or will have, a new battery in it, is how to load a memory card. So here's the memory card that I have in there. It's a whopping 128 megabytes. So this camera will only take SD cards. You can see right there it says SD, not SDXC or SDHC. Okay, so let's get the camera zoomed in a little bit as we start to talk about what it can actually do. We're going to go in here on the back, and first thing we're going to do is turn on the camera with the power button here on top by holding it down. Set date and time. One of the things about old cameras like this is that when you take the battery out, you're going to have to reset the date and time every time you put a new one in. The reason for that is because a lot of the old point and shoots that Nikon made had button cell batteries on the circuitry. And yes, if you took the camera apart carefully and put it back together correctly, you probably could find a way to change that battery. However, you really got to trust yourself with those things. So I have not attempted that with this camera. But you can set the date and time every single time you want to or not. All the date and time really does is affect whether or not the EXIF data that you're going to have on your images, or the date stamp, if you use that, whether or not that's going to be accurate. So I'm going to click no just to save us some time. Setting up the actual date and time, pretty easy to do. Now you can see that red indicator right here. That's alerting us to the fact that we have not set up the date and time, and that's going to be very annoying for this whole video. So it looks like we're setting up the date and time. All right, let's set up the date and time. Central time, no. We'll go with mountain time. Year is probably not 2008. Wow, this camera will give you a year prior to when it was actually made. 2022. It is May 24th at, I feel like it's around 9 p.m., 8 p.m., it's 8. Yeah, this is pretty darn close. Okay, close enough for this video anyway. Okay, that last thing, YMD, you can adjust the date format. I just went with the default. All right, so we got a 128 megapixel memory card in here, and you can see that it has room for 59 photos. So that's just to give you an idea of how many photos this camera can store with cameras with cards of different size. 128 megabytes, 59 photos. It's about 2 megs per photo, rough math. That's a pretty conservative number. I was able to get about 80 photos, I think, on this memory card. I don't think, yeah, there's nothing on there. Okay, so first thing that we're going to do is we're going to talk about the mode button right here. Okay, so there are 6 entries when we click the mode button. Okay, and basically what we're going to do is we're going to scroll through these to return to taking photos. What you want to do is select shooting right here. Okay, so if I click mode and I click shooting, that takes us back to the camera. That's shooting mode. So this will take us back to still imagery. High ISO, you want to avoid, because ISO performance above 200 or 400 is unusable with this camera. So what high ISO will do is force this camera to use high ISOs for things like indoor shots, but your image quality is going to really suffer. Scenes puts you into a scene mode, and the camera will select the best scene mode based on what sort of things are in the frame. So scene modes affect shooting in different ways, but you can't actually select which scene it is. The camera has some number of scene modes, and I couldn't find out what they are or how they work, but it will look at what's in front of it and determine what kind of scene it is and set parameters that way. Voice recording lets you take voice memos for notes and things like this. So this was a camera that would have been designed for somebody, let's say, going out to do an inspection, like a home inspector, back in 2008 to 2010. And they would have crawled into the crawl space of the house, taken some photos, and done a voice recording of their observations about, like degrading pillars or something like that. And that's what that would have been used for. Today, we would just use the movie mode, and there would be no reason not to use the movie mode as well on this camera, except for SD card space. Movie mode lets you record a movie that is 640 by 480 pixels. That is, by the way, for anybody who did not live through this firsthand, that is a tiny, tiny video. So what you're looking at right now, if you're looking at it in ultra high definition 4K resolution, is 3840 by 2160 pixels across. Okay, so that's 4,000 roughly. 640 goes into 4,000. How many times is that? 8? I'm doing this off the top of my head. About 6. So 640 by 480 would be about 1/6 the size. So what I'm drawing here, this little square that I'm drawing with my pencil, that's a video that is 640 by 480. So really tiny video from this camera. And then this right here is the setup menu. And this has the setup options that you can use for your camera to set some things up. So we're going to go through this in just a second, but there is one last thing I want to show you. In this screen right here, if we hit the play button, this brings up the play menu modes, which are playback. This is calendar. And what this allows you to do is, I forget if it's playing back by, I think this is playing back by date. I'm sorry, this is displaying the images by date. This is listing them in folders by date. Sound file playback allows you to play back your files. And setup, we go in here and we get to the same place again. So we'll go back, hit the play button to go back to this main setup. And we're going to go into the menu system next while we're here. Why not? And we're going to go through what the different menus are. Okay, menus. This is the format of the menu. Do you want to have your menu display in text, which is what we're doing right now, or with icons, which looks like this? So, matter of personal preference and what's easier for you to recognize. I'm going with text because it's easier for me to read upside down than recognize icons upside down. Welcome screen, none, Coolpix, or select an image. Okay. The Coolpix, that when you have this to none, when you turn on your camera, it just starts up. When you have this to Coolpix, this is what your camera displays when you start up. And then if you have an image on your SD card, which I do not, you could have it display that photo when you start up your camera. Date allows you to adjust the date. This is the date and the time zone adjustment you can make here. We've already done that. But if you accidentally forgot to do that when you swapped out your battery, you can come in here and change it this way. Monitor setting, photo info, and brightness. Okay, so photo info is how much you want to have shown on your monitor when you're taking a photo. Do you want it to show information all the time? Show it when you switch over to the monitor? Nothing at all? Your framing grid, which gives you a rule of third framing grid, very useful tool there. Or back to the show info. This is basically just a matter of personal preference and how you want your live view to display. We'll leave it on framing grid, why not? Brightness adjusts the brightness of your display so that if you're indoors, you can turn it down. If you're outdoors in full sun, you can turn it up. Date imprint off. You will not get a date imprint on your images. Date, this just imprints the date and time, and date counter. Honestly, do not know what the date counter is. I think this might be the number of days since you started. Yes, that's what this is. This is the number of days since you started the counter. So let's say, for instance, you were going out on a field study and you needed to know which date or which day of the process of the study you were taking photos. Honestly, the only camera I've ever seen that has this function is this one, which means it probably wasn't used all that much because a date imprint would give you the same amount of information. Keep going down, we have the electronic VR. Oh yes, vibration reduction, that's what that stands for. Sorry, I'm digging into my memory here for what the acronyms in 2008 were. Okay, automatic vibration reduction or no vibration reduction. Matter of personal preference, how stable you think you're going to hold your camera and how much you trust the vibration reduction in a 14-year-old camera. The answer for me is not much. Digital zoom on or off. Okay, so what digital zoom does, this lens has an optical zoom on it, and it also has, the lens is an optical zoom, and the camera has the ability to do a digital zoom. An optical zoom is where the lens does the zooming. The movement of the glass does the zooming. With the digital zoom, what happens is the lens zooms all the way out, and then the camera keeps going, and it just crops into a smaller and smaller part of the frame. And then, when it takes the photo, it takes that little tiny bit of the frame and enlarges it to 8 megapixels. And that really reduces your image quality a lot. So I strongly recommend leaving digital zoom to off and just working within the boundaries of the optical zoom, here wide to telephoto, with this camera to get the best results, because digital zoom photos will look very bad very quickly. Sound setting, button sound, and shutter sound. Do you want the camera to make a sound when you push a button? Yes or no? Do you want the camera to make a sound, an electronic sound, not a real one? Well, it's a real sound, but not one that's caused by mechanical action. When you take a photo, yes or no? Just a matter of personal preference and what kind of auditory information you want from your camera. Auto off, how long will the camera stay on before it turns off? 30 seconds, minute, 5 minutes, or 30 minutes. We're gonna set this on 30 because I'm doing the video. But basically, this is a matter of battery preservation and how much you think you're going to be using your camera when you're out walking around. If you're only taking a photo once every 20 minutes, then having it set to 30 minutes makes no sense. Let it turn off after 30 seconds or a minute. But if you're taking a photo every 2 to 3, well, maybe you want to set it to 5. But mostly matter of personal preference how you use your camera and how many batteries you have with you. Formatting the card will format the memory card. Language, you can pick from all of these different languages for the menu system. Video mode, NTSC or PAL. This is basically just, do you live in an NTSC location or a PAL location? Reset all resets all of the options that we've just gone through and set up. And firmware version is the firmware version of the camera. This one has version 1.0. If Nikon still has this on their website, I couldn't find it anywhere. I also couldn't find what the final version of the firmware for this camera is. So, distinct possibility that version 1.0 was the final firmware version as well. Okay, so that's all of the items in the setup menu. That's all of the items in the mode menu. So we're going to go back to shooting so we can take photos, right? Well, we're not quite there yet. We're going to hit the menu button, and now you can see that everything we just went through is what was in there. Okay, so we're going to talk about what's in the crosspad next. Self-timer, pretty self-explanatory. With off, as soon as you push the shutter button, it'll take a picture. 10 seconds and 2 seconds is how long it will wait in those modes before it takes a picture. The flash, auto flash, red eye reduction, no flash, flash always on, and nighttime portrait flash. Okay, so let's talk about these. Auto flash means that if the camera thinks you need a flash, it will use it. If it doesn't, it won't. Red eye reduction, the camera will pulse the flash before it takes the photo to shrink the pupils of in the eyes of whomever you're taking a photo of so that you don't get red eye in your photos. No flash completely disables the flash. This is good for things like plays and museums where flash is discouraged or prohibited. Flash always on, the flash will always fire whether you need it to or not. And night portrait, what this does is this will give you a slightly longer shutter speed, and it will fire the flash. And then the camera will take a long exposure. And what that does is, let's say you have a friend that you're out with and you're looking at a city in the background, and you have your friend stand in front of that city with the skylight lit up at night, and you use that flash mode. The exposure will start, flash will trigger, it will go on for some amount of time, God only knows how long that is, and then the exposure will stop. That will result in the cityscape behind your friend being illuminated as well as your friend by the flash. Now, one thing to set that mode up for success is that what you want to do is tell your friend not to move until the photo's done, otherwise the lights that were behind them will show through them in the image. Okay. Exposure value compensation over here on the right side of the crosspad allows you to intentionally overexpose up to 2 stops or underexpose up to 2 stops an image. So let's say you take a photo and it's a really complicated lighting situation and your camera's kind of confused by it, and it's like, oh man, everything is super, super blown out. It's very bright. You can come in here to exposure compensation and force your camera to underexpose your very bright your very bright scene to get a proper exposure. Okay, but actually I have a really bright background, like a beach or a snowy field or something behind the person I'm taking a photo of, and we're standing in the shade. Well, now you can force the camera to take a longer exposure that will expose the person who's with you in the shade. You'll completely blow out the bright scene behind them, but the person will be properly exposed. And then close-up mode is simply on or off. Well, they call it macro mode. And this basically forces the camera to shoot at the closest focus point or near the closest focus point that it can achieve, and then take a photo. And then down here we have the delete button, so that when you're in your playback menu looking at photos, if you see one you don't like, you can just hit delete. These two buttons here, as we've hinted at, are the zoom focus buttons. So if we pull this back here, you can see that adjusting the telephoto adjusts the lens to zoom in and out. And then of course the shutter button right here to take a photo. So while we are here, let's talk about how to take a photo. So when you hold the camera up, you're going to look at the screen right here. Okay, you're going to sight up your scene. You're going to zoom to get the appropriate composition, rather. And then when you're ready, you're going to take a photo. And that's it. That's all there is to it for taking a photo with the Nikon Coolpix S210. And that is it for the content portion of this video. So, some things not to do with your Nikon Coolpix S210. Don't leave this in your car. Probably don't have to worry about it being stolen, but the heat can damage the components within it. So could the cold. Could cause your battery to explode. Well, not like violently, but bulge and leak, things like that. I would hope that's the limit of it anyway. And that can really cause some problems. You also generally don't want to get this camera wet. It's not weather sealed. That'd be a good way to cause it to short out. One of the nice things about a camera like this is they're pretty inexpensive today. They can still take fine photos, but they're super easy to carry around. And you can just throw it in your back pocket, or your side pocket, or your shirt pocket, your purse, the pockets on your dresses, whatever, and take it with you and use it as much as you want. So at any rate, also, by the way, these being fairly inexpensive, they're also great first cameras for kids. And if your kid clumsily drops it down the stairs or something like that, these things, I checked eBay last night, they were selling for like $4 to $8 a piece. So not the end of the world. So at any rate, thank you everyone for watching, and I'll see you in the next camera manual. Thank you everyone for watching. If this video was helpful and useful to you, please give me a thumbs up. That lets me know that I'm on the right track and that I'm producing and creating content which is helpful to you. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, please leave those in the comments section below. I'm pretty good about responding every couple of days and answering whatever questions you have to the best of my ability. If you'd like to subscribe to find out when I have more videos about how to use cameras, photographic techniques, or the best practices for the tools of the trade, by all means please subscribe and check that notifications bell to be alerted when new content arrives. If you'd like to support the channel by joining with a membership, there are now membership options for this channel at different tiers that will give you different benefits if you would be interested in that. And one last thing, thank you everyone very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next videos. Won't we, Steinbeck? What's that look about?